Let's actually restart recording. Okay, so I just started the recording, as you probably heard. Hello, and welcome to Sasko River Center's Parent Discussion Series. This year, we're discussing the general theme of stress across our monthly presentations. Today, we have Ellen Fahey and Ethan Rothstein, who are going to recommend, suggest, discuss some other methods dealing with stress, some perhaps even some aromatherapy if we get into that, and a lot of useful information. A couple housekeeping items. As you heard, it's being recorded. Anyone who's registered for this presentation will receive a link to the recording subsequently, and if the presenters are willing, they share with me the PDF, and you'll also get a copy of the PDF. That'll go out probably tomorrow. Second thing is, personally, I like to see people's cameras on if possible, just so that the presenters get some sort of feedback for their presentation. If it's not too terrible for you, it'd be appreciated. And third, as regards to questions, usually I moderate the chat and I can look at that and interrupt when appropriate with the speakers, but they might have different requests for their interruptions. So that's the end of my spiel. I'm going to, at this moment, pass it over to Ellen and Ethan. I think Ethan, if I'm not mistaken, is going first. Mr. Cookies and Cream himself is going to start us off, and meanwhile I'm going to mute myself, but I will be, as I said, monitoring the chat and let you know, presenters that is, let you know if anyone pipes up. Enjoy.
Great.
All right, great.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more, Ethan, or?
Yeah, sure. Why don't I introduce myself while the slides are coming up? Does that work?
Okay.
I'm Ethan Rothstein. I'm a psychologist at the Sasko River Center. So I do therapy and assessments here. I've been here since 2015, and I've worked alongside a lot of people trying to reduce stress in families and individuals, and also working with other professionals. And you know, there's no shortage of situations that call for stress reducers of different forms. So Ellen and I thought this was a really relevant topic for always, but especially now too. And my co-presenter, Ellen Fahey, you want to tell a little about yourself?
Sure, yeah, welcome. I'm so happy that you guys could join us today. So I am a family nurse practitioner, licensed and certified, and I have my doctorate degree from Columbia. I've been with Sasko since 2011, I think. I'm feeling pretty old when I say these things. Worked with a lot of adolescents, done a lot of primary care, and now kind of just focusing on behavioral health and recognizing where our children and adolescents are right now, as you all can appreciate, coming off the pandemic and the general feeling of stress and anxiety, and how to fight back a little bit. So we're going to talk to you guys about that. I'm going to try and do the slides. Okay.
All right, great. So today, Ellie and I are going to talk a bit about the differences between stress and anxiety. It can be a fine line. There's definitely a lot of gray area, but there is a differentiation that we need to make. You know, there are several different ways to do it. I think the easiest way to think about it is short-term versus long-term stressors. You know, I think about a chronic stressor could develop into anxiety, but we'll talk more about those details. And you know, as we talk more about interventions and treatment options, whether you are under stress or whether you are experiencing anxiety might help guide that choice. And in doing so, there's lots of non-pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical interventions for anxiety. You probably know about some of them. Maybe you've tried some of them. Ellen and I are going to walk through ones that have good research evidence and ones that we tend to utilize at Sasko. So, you know, just to define stress, it's really any reaction, and whether we want to define that as a physiological reaction, a psychological reaction, is we are reacting to what's going on. Now, the tricky part is that stress, we often talk about, even as this cartoon kind of implies, we often think about stress as a negative thing. And I want to go a bit further than what this definition says, and to say stress is neutral. In and of itself, stress is neutral. It's how we react to the stress. Oftentimes when people are talking about stress, they really mean distress. I'm in distress. When they, oh, I'm so stressed out. What they're really saying is, I'm in distress. But I also want you to think about the fact that we are under stress every single day in some form or another. When our stress exceeds our coping or our abilities or our kind of foundation, if you will, in a building analogy, that's when we start to feel the distress. The building I'm in is under stress, but hopefully the forces all counteract each other. And so this is a safe place to be, even though in a physical sense, it's under stress, it holds, it's safe. And you know what, it could tolerate a storm too. And so that's the other thing. It's not just when things are fine, how am I doing? But if things were to increase, if there was a hurricane, if there's a crisis, now what happens? And so, but stress and anxiety have a lot of similarities. They can both show up in physical ways. You can see that list there: how heart palpitations, dry mouth, sweating, all those things we experience when we give a talk like this, you know. And Ella and I were sort of joking, although I wouldn't necessarily, I don't want to speak for you, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm anxious now, but I'm stressed, you know, for giving a talk like this. And as we move on, I'll give you more sense of how that's sort of modulated and how that might show up over time.
So we'd like you to kind of participate and give us your thoughts on what you think are the 5 top stressors that children face and adolescents face right now. So if you could take a moment and just throw some ideas into the chat, thinking about what things might stress your children out. And we'll kind of talk about them a little bit. School,
future,
ooh, yes, peer pressure, yeah. Any others?
Those are great ones.
That people want to share? Social, yep.
Yeah,
Social media.
yeah, social
Watching
media.
arguments between parents. Good, Alexandra, right? Yep. Yep. Great. So you guys brought up a couple of things. So the 5 top ones, and you kind of hit on them all for the most part, really is social. So peer relationships, and certainly middle school, high school, key times where peer relationships, friends really play a critical role in the development of the child's, and where it's an area that can cause them much worry and much concern. And normal stress, like feeling a little bit worried about not getting invited to a party, or a little bit of FOMO when you see something on social media, is all reasonable, but sometimes that can get overwhelming at times when there's a lot of things getting bombarded, and the individual is really not feeling good about where they stand within their social peers, whether it's because of their interaction skills, or whether because they're in the process of trying to make new friends or what have you, or there's other things going on with them as far as their self-esteem are concerned, which can really challenge and put more stress on socials. And then academics. So, you know, parents will always say, like, we don't care what kind of grades he gets, as long as he tries, right? Or as long as they put their best effort. And that's always true. Like, you want your child to do the best that you can, but there is both an internal and an external amount of stress that comes in, or pressure that comes in for academics to succeed. And our community in Fairfield County is filled with a lot of high achievers and a lot of individuals who are striving to kind of meet this expectation of this level that could be either internally driven or externally driven. And so if they're finding it hard to manage academically for whatever reason, that's obviously going to be a stressor. And then overscheduled. So this one's kind of tricky, because people will say sometimes, like, if my child's not scheduled, then too much downtime, they're on the computer or they're doing video games. Excuse me. So it's finding the balance that's really tricky, making sure that they have enough time to get their homework done, have enough time to have their peer thing, and just that relaxation time. So I think you can all appreciate when they come home from school, sometimes they don't really necessarily want to transition right into another activity. They might need like an hour or so to decompress and take some time to sort of regroup, especially if school was stressful that day or there's a lot going on. And then Alexandra, I think you mentioned, you know, parents fighting or family stress. If one or both parents have some anxiety or suffer some depression, or that they're feeling overwhelmed by things or overly worrying about their child's performance in any of the above items, your child's going to feel it, even though we try not to. They're sponges in ways that we can't even imagine, and they can absorb what's going on in the home. And it's hard for us as parents to kind of mediate that sometimes, but it's important to recognize and talk about it and find ways to both reduce your stress and then try to get your child to recognize that what you're feeling is not necessarily what they need to feel. And then family changes, right? So if you're recently moved or you're going through a divorce or there's a sibling in the family, or maybe you're getting married for the first time or getting remarried or what have you, all of these things are stressful activities. And one thing we wanted to just point out too is like most of the time stressors are short-lived and move on. So if there's a family change, there's a move. After the move, the child readjusted and then they move on. If there's some stress that you're feeling, maybe a loved one is sick or something happened during COVID, it's a period of time and then you move on. So we want to be looking at stress as sort of demands on our body that are limited, and that the body's nervous system then has the time to sort of relax and kind of get down from that sort of overly active state, if that makes sense. And if something's not making sense, please chime in. Oh, computers. Yeah, we're going to talk
Ellen,
about computers. Yeah.
Ellen, I just wanted to add one thing to the family changes that's come up just as I've talked with families, and it's construction or a renovation, which in some ways seems like a great thing, and it's very positive. This is one of those positive stressors in a way. It's great. We're going to have a new kitchen or whatnot. We could be kind of judgmental of that and say, well, this is a first world problem. Like, how big is that deal if you get to renovate your kitchen? Come on. But it is a stressor. It truly is. And we'd be foolish to think that's not going to impact the family and the system when it's like, what are we cooking? Where are we doing the dishes? Those sorts of changes. And so even though it comes from something positive, you can see how it can kind of filter out, even because it is a significant change.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the stress that the parents may be feeling during this process as well can play a role in it, right? So recognizing how these changes and routine, right? So children like routine. If the routine gets changed up because now they're in a rental and will I be able to get back home or what have you? Ethan talked about this already, so I don't really need to go through it, but not all stress is bad. And some levels of stress can be very positive and productive. And like, I was a little stressed to make sure that I was prepared for my presentation today. So I made sure I reviewed my slides and like had my talking points, so that made me prepared. And I'll hear students say that sometimes when we talk about anxiety, like, well, if I lose my anxiety, will I be able to get my work done like I do before? And so it's kind of balancing that out a little bit. And then, too little stress sometimes can, if there's not enough stimulation going on, kids can get a little bored and they'll look for things to kind of keep them going. And then too much stress can lead to anxiety disorders, as we can talk about. And I thought this cartoon was kind of funny. According to the latest research, the average human body is 20% water and 80% stress, which I think we could have all laughed about during COVID because we're probably all 80% stressed. And now we're kind of coming out of that a little bit, which is nice to see to some degree. Okay, next slide.
So this is a graphic representation of that curvilinear relationship between stress and performance, right? So sometimes on the x-axis, we see it could be stress, it could be anxiety, it could be arousal or stimulation. So it depends on how general you want to think about it. But it's the body's nervous system in a very general way, right? So depending on how activated that is, you can see low levels, I don't care, I'm not going to class, I'm not studying for the math test, I'm not talking to the teacher, I'm not doing my homework, nope, nope, nope. On the other end, oh my goodness, the math test is coming up. I'm so nervous about it. I can't even think. I'm going to stay up all night studying. I'm not going to get enough sleep. I'm not going to think clearly during the test. And that's not going to lead to good performance either. It's at medium level, right? But it's tricky. You literally need to strike the balance. And what Ellen was saying with some, especially high achieving kids, their anxiety puts them in that mid-level sometimes. And so there's a benefit of it, right? So in a way, going back to that idea of stress being or anxiety being good or bad, that's sort of a false dichotomy. Like that's just artificial. Okay. So really it's what level they're at. So we need a little bit to be activated and to get into this focused and engaged state. I love this graph for a few reasons. One is because it shows the sense that we can modulate our stress a little bit to change our performance, right? So with the awareness of where our mind and body are at, if we realize, you know what, I'm kind of low energy here, I need to activate and get up for this, I need to energize. Thinking about procrastination, often the cycle for procrastination is waiting for that anxiety to get high enough, and then it pushes you finally into focused and engaged, but very quickly to stress and restlessness. So that I would say that that focus and engage part is much smaller for a procrastinator, right? And there's also evidence that this York-Dodson curve, at some point at this high level, that tail actually dips off faster. It's a quick tipping point. It's sort of like we go off the cliff a little bit. It's not as gradual as this graph may make it seem. But what I like is that it shows that we can modulate our stress levels up and down depending on how stressed we are for the situation. Do I need to activate myself? Do I need to calm down? And so again, it's not saying that all stress is bad or there's no upside to it. But it shows that there's a limit to this, and recognizing if you are slipping into this high level that we do need to modulate it, but it doesn't mean our stress and anxiety need to go to zero for it to be effective. That's the other thing, right? We're not really hoping for zero anxiety. That's unrealistic. And is going to be if that's what your expectation is, you're going to be disappointed every single time. So in terms of the symptoms of what stress might look like, you might imagine, if you think about what you feel like when you're stressed, there's emotional and what I think about like cognitive symptoms, right? That worry, irritability, I'm on edge, I can't concentrate, I'm kind of wound up, to put it like that. But that has a lot of physical pieces too. When we're stressed, when I think about physical symptoms of stress, I think about the things that a lie detector test would pick up on, right? Sweating, increased heart rate, those sorts of nervous system arousal. But what's really interesting about stress is it can show up in sneaky physical ways that we don't always notice. And I have to say that this is a clinical observation more than anything, but I found that people who don't quite recognize that they are experiencing anxiety, they either have always felt that way, not known any different, or they're sort of detached from that sensation of worry, and that general sense of anxiety. It shows up as physical symptoms. It shows up as a stomachache. It shows up as a headache. It shows up as difficulty sleeping. So sometimes in kids, sometimes in adults too, that might be the first indication of, there's some significant stress here. My child's under stress. I realize they're waking up every morning with a stomachache. And here's the thing, they're not making it up. That's legitimate GI upset. It just has a psychological cause, not a medical cause. But they're not faking it. I just want to be clear about that. But those stomach aches and those headaches, they'll show up in sneaky ways. So if you find that happening in yourself and your child, I would recommend tracking that just to get a sense. Is it every Sunday night? Is it when there's a lot of homework? Is it before the play date? Can you start to see patterns? Because if you see those patterns, that's going to be more evidence that this is stress and anxiety driven, and also give you a sense of, I need to prepare for the situation more or a little different, right? I need to do something to take it down a notch. I know if I don't prepare for a presentation, the right side is going to go nuts in my body, truly. So I know I need to sort of center and gather myself before a presentation, or else I'm going to experience a lot of these things. Next slide. So right. That's the big question, right? So we all kind of know what stress is. I'm sure you've all experienced it, but you're really here for what to do about it. And so this slide, so I'm going to talk about the non-pharmaceutical approaches to stress. And I kind of put these into two general categories. On this side, I think about these are, you don't need anything else to do them. You have all of these abilities, all the materials, all the supplies within you right now. So that's kind of exciting, right? In that way, like, and that's what I like about these, where you aren't waiting for something outside of you to kind of rescue you. Oh, I forgot my whatever, I can't go on the flight. That's not the goal. The goal is to be able to go on the flight anyway, right? So, but in terms of stress reducing approaches, physical exercise is number one. We all kind of know this. I think anyone who exercises regularly knows what it feels like when that all of a sudden stops, when your routine gets broken up, when you go on vacation, when your schedule changes and you miss a couple workouts in a row. You start to feel a little different. Maybe it starts to feel like a little restlessness at first, you know? But think about that is that kind of stress bucket filling back up. The physical exercise lets some water and drains that bucket a little bit, at least a little bit, at least to take the edge off. Physical exercise can be really daunting though for a lot of people. I get it, whether it's a time, whether it's a skill or knowledge thing, whether it's a cost thing of the gym, or my recommendation in this is consistency over intensity. Physical exercise does not mean you got to get a personal trainer and work out 2 hours a day. Physical exercise really means going for a brisk walk for 15 to 20 minutes a day. That's what that means, right? You don't need a fancy gym. You know, you don't need anything else. That's a good place to start, let's say, right? So doing that daily is going to be more beneficial than going to the gym once a week or once every 2 weeks and really going crazy there. And putting everything into it. It's super intense. That's not going to have as much long-term benefit as smaller bits of consistent physical exercise. I think Ellen's going to talk about meditation more later, but I tried to break it down a little bit. Maybe somebody who's, admittedly, I'm not a big meditator. I'm just going to put that out there. That's not my go-to stress reliever. Maybe it should be. I always feel like it should. But if I were to parse out what the active ingredients of that are, and feel free to disagree with me, it would be the paced breathing, kind of getting control of your breathing. Again, another incredibly effective stress reducer that's often overlooked. Kids sort of poo-poo it and push it away. It's really, it's a game changer. And again, it's something we always have with us. No one can take it away. We can't forget it. No one can tell us to stop doing it, right? Whether we're in class, whether we're on a flight, whether we're giving a presentation, it's always with us. So we can always slow our breathing down. That in turn will slow down our physiology. We'll reduce that stress. Is it going to bring it to zero? Nope, but it might take the edge off. So if we think about that curve and we feel ourselves tipping into distress, can we take the edge off and get back into that optimal level of performance? The other great part about meditation, and I think in general that philosophy, is that mindfulness piece. Being mindful of the thoughts you have, not being too attached to them, being accepting of them. They come into our awareness, they leave our awareness. Meditation is a lot about not letting your mind wander into all those things we typically worry about. It really enhances that mindfulness. And if we think about mindfulness, you know, that term is all over and used a lot. I see the benefit as checking in with your mind and body for what do I need right now? Am I amped up? Do I need to calm down? Am I really low energy and I need to get activated, right? That kind of checking in with yourself and being aware of that. And so that's going to be tough for kids. It's very metacognitive, thinking about their thinking. But the sooner we can develop that, the better. Do they need to be meditating? I don't know. I don't know. Again, feel free to disagree with me. I don't know if we need to have all our kids be meditating, but encouraging that mindfulness piece is really important. Thinking about mindfulness and being aware of those physiological symptoms of anxiety or stress that might be the first cues that we're getting nervous. If we can tap into that, we can catch it early and not wait until the worries have sort of run wild in our mind. Paired or progressive muscle relaxation. I love this one. It goes hand in hand with the mindfulness piece. In short, the idea is I like to work top down. It's scanning your body for where there is tension in it. Everyone when it gets stressed out, they hold tension in different places. Maybe you know, okay? I find that my shoulders get tense, okay? So that happens. I know that, so I know, okay, I gotta drop my shoulders. If I'm really stressed, my forehead starts to buckle a little bit. I get those lines up, right? That kind of thing. And what the body scan does is allow you to say, okay, here's where the tension is. And one strategy I like to use is you almost over clench that area and then you let it go, right? So the idea is like squeeze, squeeze, squeeze the lemons. If I'm carrying tension in my arm, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze the lemons, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze as much as you can. And then you let it go. And then it's kind of like reminding your body what it feels like to be relaxed. What does your arm feel like to be relaxed? What does your back feel like to be relaxed? Your legs, maybe you're squeezing your toes in your sneakers, you know, that kind of thing in your shoes. Being aware of those muscular signs of stress and tapping it and being able to relax those is really, really powerful. Social connection, it's a huge one. And in the last 3 years, it's really been tested, you know. I think if anything, COVID has shown that we really need social connection. In working with kids, that's been such a huge piece to overcome, whether it was social distancing, physical distancing, other restrictions like that, colliding with screens, social media, and video games being the social outlet. That is literally another talk, but that's tough, right? How do we strike that balance between this is my only this is my only social outlet, this is my only social connection. Don't take my video games away from me. I'm having some version of that conversation with a lot of parents right now. The last piece there, spirituality. It's an interesting one. And, you know, not to get too much into religion, you know, religion is an aspect of spirituality, but kind of a broader idea, even if you aren't religious, the idea of the belief in something you can't prove. I've always found that so interesting. And I heard that with a talk from the guru in executive functioning skills, George McCloskey. He really pushed this, and I was sort of shocked. You know, it was at the beginning of an executive functioning talk, but he really pushed a belief in something you can't prove. And you know, that stuck with me years ago after I heard this talk, and I've thought about it, and I've thought about it, and I've looked at some of the research. But it can be really powerful. And if we think about, you know, if we think about things like AA, you know, that's something that's a tenet of it, whether you're calling it God or not, a higher power, that idea that there's something else out there and you can't necessarily prove it. That can be really powerful, and it can be a way to, buffer stressors that come into your life. All right. Next, what we got? All right. Okay. And so the next slide here is more of those external ways to fight stress. Okay, and so these are the non-pharmaceutical ones. These are the natural remedies, loosely, quote unquote. As you might know, there's a ton out there on natural remedies. For like, if you Google that, you're going to get a bajillion results, right? A lot with some evidence. So I wanted to put up here the natural remedies that have the most evidence about them, that have stood up to meta-analyses, where they take a whole bunch of clinical studies and smash them together and say, is there an effect? Is there an effect above and beyond placebo? Is there an effect equivalent to the sort of treatment as usual, the standard of care, which might be an SSRIs? You know, can these natural remedies stand up to that? I just wanted to put this out there that little plug. I must have been way ahead of the times in the curve here, although we've gotten popular way back when, and I managed to publish an article on natural remedies for anxiety disorders. This is now outdated, but you know, it's just interesting. You know, nearly 15 years later, we're still talking about it, and we're still adding to that array. But clearly, it's something that's always been on my mind in some forms. And you know, as a psychologist who doesn't prescribe medication, I'm always looking for, not to poo-poo medication, but I'm always looking for those non-prescription options. So if you dig into the research, if you look at meta-analyses, if you look at sort of critical tests, if you will, of whether things are working, you know, the one with the most evidence is Selexin, which is basically the brand name of a medication that's approved in Europe, and it's steam distilled lavender essential oil in a capsule. Isn't that incredible? So that it has good research evidence for anxiety and insomnia, and maybe even depression. And what I mean by that is Selexin beats out placebo. This is not just in your head. This is not right. So, okay, beats that. And it tends to do just as well as a lot of the treatment as usual options like Zoloft or Celexa, those sorts of SSRIs that in terms of reductions of anxiety, they tend to do just as well or statistically similar and are much better tolerated. There are virtually no side effects noted with the Selexin administration. So that's pretty cool that it's in a lot of these studies, it's doing as well as some of the pharmaceuticals without the side effects. Another one that's come up is ashwagandha, which is generally well tolerated too. It tends to have the studies on it have smaller sample sizes though, so more research is needed, and that's also a general theme amidst all of these. Ginkgo biloba can be effective, but it's not always well tolerated. It's associated with some GI upset and headaches, and then there's some contradictions with like bleeding disorders and things like that to look out for. So I should have prefaced this all by, don't go out there and load up your system with any of these willy-nilly. You know, you still need to be cautious because some of these things can have negative outcomes, even though they're natural. For instance, kava or kava, it has evidence that it reduces anxiety, but there's also evidence of liver toxicity, right? That's gone back and forth. It's been approved, it's been unapproved, it's been, it's been in and out. But in general, it's just a note of caution where, yeah, in high doses, that can have some real physical effects there. Things like passion flower and saffron have some promising research, but more is needed. Similar, right now there's insufficient evidence for things like valerian and chamomile and L-theanine. Maybe you've benefited from that or know somebody who has, and this is where it gets tricky because for the individual, some of these things may work. But really, these are the natural remedies that stand up to much wider samples across the population there. And so, I would recommend getting into if you were to explore these, getting in kind of slowly, starting low, going slow, talking with your healthcare provider if you're serious about it or you're trying to go on any sort of legitimate dosing there. In terms of essential oils, I'll put in a plug for our aromatherapy consult here. If you go on the website, I just so happens to be my wife, Christina Rothstein. She knows all about lavender and a whole bunch of other essential oils that I would say need more research for their effectiveness across things. You kind of can get the message of, oh, they'll do everything, every essential oil will do everything for everyone. And that's just not the case, right? But I was skeptical when she got into it. I dug into the research and was kind of like, oh, wow, there's way more research than I thought there was. Selexin and lavender essential oil clearly leading the pack, but that was enough to say, it's clearly doing something. It's beating out a placebo. It's worth looking at more. So I wanted to mention that as well. All right, Ellen, want to take over?
All right, so I'm going to talk about another really important part of stress reduction and prevention of anxiety is sleep. And I love this. This used to be up in my office, but since we moved, I haven't put it up yet. But the kids will always be so fascinated to kind of find themselves, these school-age kids or these teens. And the middle line is what's predicted to be norm. And then some people might need more, some people might need less, but many of our adolescents and children are not getting enough sleep for many different reasons. And sleep is a vital component in helping the nervous system to sort of recharge, regroup, come out of that fight or flight sort of high intense stress mode, and get ready for the next day. It's the time where learning gets placed into the long-term memory. It's the time where they can kind of restore and rejuvenate, but yet it's the thing that often gets pushed aside, especially for our high school adolescents when they have these long, overly scheduled days and they're taking 4 APs and they have all this homework and they're going to bed at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning and waking up at 6 or 7 o'clock the next day. So it truly is vital. And just kind of thinking how sleep and stress are related. We've all experienced trouble falling asleep at times when we're feeling a little overwhelmed and we've got a lot on our mind, waking up in the middle of the night or waking up early with that kind of little bit of a dread. Sometimes I say, like, do you find yourself waking up early with a little bit of a pit in your stomach or a little bit of tension in your body? And they're like, yeah, they can't really identify these little things, and they're subtle. And then there can be what we call like sleep anxiety, like when they have persistently trouble falling asleep, then they feel anxious about going to sleep. And then all of a sudden they're requiring some external stimulation or some external factor to make them fall asleep. So it might be having parents come into the bed and lying down with them for a little while to get them to fall asleep. And it seems really benign to do that, but persistently over time, that can really interfere with their sleep hygiene, which I'm going to talk about for a second. And we've heard about this, like, just like exercise, we all know that exercise is good for us. We all know that we should have a good sleep hygiene or a good sleep routine, but it's something that often can go to the wayside when things are getting a little bit more overwhelming. So as parents, ideally, we want to try and stick to a bedtime, looking at the hours that the age group should have approximately to sleep, knowing what time they have to get up in the morning, and try to be consistent with going to bed at the same time. Oftentimes adolescents will go to bed very late, Monday through Thursday, and then on the weekends they go to bed maybe even later, but they'll sleep all day or some other factor like that. So having a specific time is really helpful. Avoiding stimulants before bed makes so much sense, but it's really hard to turn off the computer sometimes, which is that blue light that stimulates the brain. I'm sure most parents are not giving their kids any kind of caffeine, but even thinking about sometimes chocolate before you go to bed, even that little bit of ice cream could have a little caffeine in it. You want to be cautious about that and reduce that at least 2 hours before they go to sleep at night, which is hard, right? Because if they're studying up until the last minute and it's now 11:30 and they need to get to sleep, it's hard for their brain to kind of calm down. And this is one that I know that as a parent, I wasn't the best in this, but my kids are older now, so we didn't necessarily have cell phones the same way, the smartphones, when they were young, but keeping them out of the bedroom. So anybody out there who's got elementary school children and you haven't introduced a phone yet, start now by putting whatever your routine is, saying everybody puts the phone in the kitchen, like all kids put the phone in the kitchen at night. We have no devices in the bedroom. Now, some people will say, oh, well, they listen to apps online or they listen to music, and maybe there's other ways to find that give them that ability to have that relaxation component at night without having the phone, because more than likely they're going to be awoken by it, or something might trigger their thought and they're going to grab the phone and start scrolling through, or they're looking at social media right before they go to bed. I think Ethan wants to say something.
Oh, I was just, as you were saying that, Ellen, I had the thought of like, if you're really getting pushed back from taking it out of the room, because I use it as my alarm clock, or I use a calming app, or I use it as my noise machine. How you can smoothly replace those with a non-screen, even something like a smart speaker, where you have the same access to the auditory part, but it's not visual, right? So, yep, okay, I'm sure you can set an alarm clock on that, and you can get your whatever noise or story or music you like to listen to, but you aren't distracted by social media. There's not blue light pouring into your room.
Right.
So I think things like that can be that compromise. So you kind of hear your child out, but it's really critical to keep them out of the room. I mean, the number of issues I've come across due to phones being in the room too late,
Yeah,
it goes on and on. So
it goes on and on, and they will fight you. So it's one of those things. Remember when the kids were little and you say, pick your battles? This is a battle that you kind of want to pick and kind of hold your guns to if you can, for the most part, because it really does help with the cognitive development over time. And the other thing is, bed is for sleeping. So when we lie down in bed, our body wants to associate that with falling asleep and not with watching TV, not with doing their homework on their bed. So setting up a space where they can do that outside of their bedroom, and then exercise. Ethan talked about that. It's so vitally important. And many of our adolescents get it. It's built into their day. But if you've got somebody who's sort of on the high stress side, building in some extra activity, especially in the morning, can be very helpful for helping them to fall asleep at night. And something to consider. And then we already talked a little bit about meditation, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of the things that I kind of share with people is that they've got different names for it, but I call it Foursquare, where, you know, you can teach your child to take a deep breath in for like count 1, 2, 3, 4 as they breathe in, hold it for 4 seconds. And breath holding actually kind of helps to reduce the heart rate. And it's been shown to be very effective. And then exhale for 4 and do it 4 times and repeat it. And what it does is just sort of reduces that nervous system's sort of overactiveness and sort of takes the mind away from their thoughts of other things and can allow them to relax a little bit so the body can naturally fall asleep. And Ethan kind of talked about the body scan, but I often talk about progressive relaxation, where I tell them to start at their toes and just think about their toes and just think about, I'm going to relax my toes, I'm going to relax my foot, I'm going to relax my ankle, and go really slow and build up to their body. And, you know, before long, you can fall asleep because you're just taking that mind away from some of the things that are distracting it. Now, it doesn't always work, and you might have to do it a few times to see if it happens, to see if it does. But these are all things that we can teach our children and ourselves when we're feeling overly stressed. And then there's a lot of devices out there that you might have found, and these are just a few of them. The sound machine's been around for a while. Obviously, weighted blanket's been around, but there's this thing called the Dodo, and it's this little round light, and it's like a metronome. And what you're supposed to do is the whole idea is really to get the mind not thinking about what the worry, sort of distract the mind and focusing on something else. And the light kind of changes over time, so you sort of focus on the light, and there's this sort of repetitiveness to it, and it kind of just brings you down a little bit, but it requires you to keep your eyes open, which is kind of kooky. And so you kind of just gently fall asleep. And then the chill pill is this pill that you hold in your hands, and it sort of does this little vibration. And the idea is that it's supposed to just kind of calm the nervous system a little bit. You know, not a lot of evidence for these things necessarily, but whatever you think might help your child to just redirect their thoughts and allow their breathing to calm, to slow down and relax them is really what we're looking at for some external devices there. Even you could do a little bit of a massage, a little rub, but I would discourage lying down in bed with them necessarily to help them fall asleep at night. And then there's some medications that people will often use, and probably the biggest one that parents will ask about is melatonin. And melatonin is something that we naturally produce in our body. Some people might have low levels of melatonin, but it just makes us feel sleepy. And so that can be very helpful for students that are, or children who are having like short-term stress and they're feeling like it's a hard time falling asleep. And you can use melatonin. It starts at 1 milligrams. I would say probably go no higher than 5 milligrams in about 45 minutes or so before bed. But the important stuff with any kind of non-federally regulated product like melatonin or some of the herbs is that you want to make sure that you're getting something that has United States Pharmacopoeia verified trademark on it. So when you're looking to buy something, look for that USP verified trademark on the bottle, which just tells you that the active ingredients have been evaluated by, an organization. And so sometimes there can be things that get mixed in with these products, and we don't necessarily know how we're going to respond to them. The same thing is true with Benadryl. So diphenhydramine, simple over the counter, it's the main ingredient in Tylenol PM or Advil PM. And what it does, it just crosses the blood-brain barrier and makes you feel sleepy. This is Benadryl, or antihistamines I'm going to talk about can also be good for short-term periods of anxiety, like if you're having a little panic, feeling kind of stressed, just because it crosses that blood-brain barrier and it kind of makes you feel relaxed a little bit. Now, there are some individuals that have a paradoxical effect, meaning like they take Benadryl or diphenhydramine and they get wired. Well, you might have experienced that when your child was little, so you don't want to do that before they go to bed, or I can't really tell you what child's going to be like that. It's not very common, but it does happen sometimes. And then some of the other things are magnesium can be very helpful with and very soothing, and especially magnesium with L-theanine. So L-theanine is an amino acid that can help to just kind of relax us a little bit. It's also found in green teas. So people will often use tea to sort of bring the body down and relax, but green teas are the ones that have the L-theanine in them. And then there's herbal teas like chamomile, which are also soothing, but don't necessarily have the L-theanine in it. But those are things that you can try. So setting up that bedtime routine might be, you know, turning off the screens. Maybe it's having a nice cup of tea at night. Maybe it's taking a warm bath. I didn't include that on the list, but taking a shower warms the body's temperature and kind of makes it feel more relaxed, and to get them ready to go to sleep at night. And then there are controlled substances, meaning medications that are potentially addictive. And then there's non-controlled substances that can help with sleep. And one that I use pretty often is trazodone. It started out as an antidepressant, but really what it did is just made people sleepy. And you take it 45 minutes or so before bed, and it kind of help you fall asleep and stay asleep. So for that person who's having like middle of the night wakening because they're feeling anxious, can be very nice to use for a period of time. Biggest side effects tend to be active dreams and feeling groggy during the day. Same thing with melatonin. Sometimes people can have very active dreams and they don't like that. And sometimes there can be grogginess in the morning. And then buspirone and hydroxyzine. So hydroxyzine is a different type of antihistamine that is often used for panic attacks and to help people sleep. And buspirone is an atypical anxiolytic that can just kind of quiet the person down and make them feel more relaxed. So there are some medications that we can use for a short period of time, or in some cases for a longer period of time if needed, to help with getting a good night's sleep. The other thing I just want to make a comment about too is I do a lot of ADHD work, and there's been studies to show that individuals with ADHD are actually more likely to have an underlying sleep disorder, such as restless leg syndrome, narcolepsy. And so I will often do a nice sleep evaluation just to see, could there be an underlying sleep disorder, and then get a sleep study. Because if we can improve the sleep, we are actually going to reduce the anxiety and stress. And for my ADHD kids, I've actually reduced the medications once we've gotten their sleep under control. So it's a really important component of your child's well-being, but it can't be a stressful thing. Like we can't make it, you gotta go to bed, you know, to get enough sleep. Otherwise, we're gonna give them more anxiety about going to sleep. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Ethan to talk a little bit more when we get stressed to become anxiety. Ooh, and we've only have 5 minutes left.
Right, so I'll be brief, and you know, we've talked a little bit about the differences between stress and anxiety. There's some phrasing on here that I might contradict, but here's my general takeaway for this slide and to think about for yourselves or your kids is there's a stressor, like I said before, that stressor is neutral on the surface, and then the idea is, do you interpret that as a challenge or a threat? Challenges can be stressful. Running a mile can be stressful. Do I think I can do it? Yeah. Is it going to be easy? No, but I got this. You know, this is a challenge. I'm ready to rise to the challenge versus a threat. If I have to run a marathon tomorrow, I'm not going to feel good about that, right? That's too much for me, right? I can't. That's over and above what I think I can handle right now. I see that as a threat. So if we think about students going into a math test, is this a challenge? I got this, or do I feel kind of threatened by this? Or social situation. Yay, this is so exciting. I did get to hang out with my friends, or, oh my God, I can't believe I have to have another group conversation. That's so threatening. So I think that's a big differentiator. What takes a sort of neutral stressor and makes it feel like a recognized threat. The issue is in 2023, a lot of our threats are not life-threatening, if that makes sense. They're stressful, they're annoying, they're uncomfortable, but they aren't necessarily threatening our life and limb. But we may respond that way, and then we can have this lingering anxiety. As humans, we do a terrible job of holding on to that stress longer than we should, right? And a lot of the animal world can let that go when the stressor is gone. We're not as good as that.
Okay.
And the next slide has a bit more about how anxiety can present in kids, and I think this is really important because it doesn't always present in the typical I'm so nervous way, like on the bottom left here in the purple. That might be the sort of typical way. Oh, I'm nervous, I have negative thoughts, I'm worried, right? But then we see things like, oh, my child's more clingy than usual, or you know what? My child's quicker to react and is getting angry. So now we see, please, when you see your child getting angry or defiant or resistant, consider the ways anxiety might be influencing that. Are they trying to avoid this? Are they threatened by the situation? Do they feel threatened by the situation and they're responding in an anxious way? Just something to consider about. And like I mentioned before, those sneaky things that start might be, the first wind of it might be that they're having stomach aches, or that they're having trouble sleeping, or you know what, I'm having a little trouble concentrating, right? So sometimes I'll have a referral saying, I think my child has ADHD. And there's been times I'd say, no, your child actually just has anxiety that's interfering with their day and their school and their attention so much that everybody's noticing that kind of thing. And so I just want you to be aware of the sort of other ways it can show up.
That emotional
now certainly,
piece too.
yeah, yes.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
emotional piece, the unexplained crying, kind of like just feeling more emotional.
Yeah. And sort of like, where'd that come from? That's unusual for my child. Like those sorts of changes in functioning, always keep your eye out on. Because we can nip these things in the bud early on as they're stressed, but as the next slide points out is, these things can develop into full-fledged anxiety disorders. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but generalized anxiety disorder, what I want to point out is not just a worry, but oftentimes there's a physiological symptom almost always associated with generalized anxiety disorder, right? So if we think about those, like that is more of the that's the rule, not the exception. Certainly panic attacks. If the anxiety is socially specific, that's going to be more of a social anxiety piece. Separation anxiety and selective mutism we often see in younger kids, not totally exclusively. And then phobias are specific things that people are scared of that are sort of over and above what we would expect. But again, sort of I'm perceiving that bug as a threat, not as a nuisance, right? That fly in the room is going to somehow harm you. Like that's where the mind goes, where that dog's going to bite you.
Okay, so
yeah.
So when stress becomes anxiety and we get a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, then we're sort of looking at ways to manage it. And so all the evidence really supports that, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy or working with a counselor as first-line treatment for the treatment and management of anxiety. And medications can come into play when there's really a lot of interference in the child's ability to sort of function during the day. So whether if the anxiety is getting pretty high and you've tried some of the things that Ethan and I have already talked about, you're working with the therapist, then using medicine can really be very helpful and beneficial and can be sort of like life-changing goosebump moments, because you have somebody that's kind of hanging on by a thread to some degree by trying to do everything that they can to do everything right, but are still feeling overwhelmed and anxious. The nervous system is just in a high alert all the time. And so the treatments that tend to be, I broke them down sort of like long-term and short-term to some degree, but first-line treatment for medication for like short-term use. So like if you can think about, say something's happening, like if you were home and your child's really feeling overwhelmed, then and you had some diphenhydramine in the house, you could theoretically try it as long as it doesn't give that paradoxical effect at 1 milligram per kilogram per dose. And so you might not know how many kilograms they are, but whatever their pounds are, you divide it by 2.2. But more than likely it'd be like 12.5 milligrams for the most part, or 25 milligrams, or a big kid, a full adult might be 50 milligrams. That could help to just kind of manage it, but also maybe using that hydroxyzine or having that on board in the house for when things were feeling out of control. And a panic attack can be, can look a little bit like heart racing, palm sweaty, stomach in a knot, could be vomiting, could be crying, it could be yelling or screaming, just feeling completely out of control can be a little helpful. And then the atypical anxiolytics, this Buspar, can be very helpful to take the edge off. And you can use it like in the morning or at night. it's like 7.5 to 30 milligrams, depending on the person's response. And these medicines, both antihistamines and the atypicals, will give you some drowsiness, some dry mouth. So some of the side effects that can go along with it. And then you have your typical benzodiazepines, the ones that you kind of think of for mostly adults. And sometimes we use these in pediatrics, not as often. These are controlled substances. There is a risk of misuse or abuse or becoming physically addicted to them, but they're very good medications. And when you need them, you need them. And so mostly we'll use like Ativan that last anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, or Klonopin maybe at nighttime to help us sleep if things are really bad. And we've tried the non-controlled substances and they haven't been working. Maybe using a Klonopin just to kind of reset that nervous system can be really helpful. And then lastly, for some long-term treatment, it really is the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these SSRIs that you've probably heard about. They've been around for a long time. Interesting enough, you might know that they started as antidepressants, and the studies show that they don't work for depression nearly as well as they work for anxiety. And they can really be a life changer in anxiety, in the sense that you start them at a low dose and you see how you tolerate them, and they build up over time. So what they do is allow for serotonin to be available in the body, which helps to reduce anxiety in the nervous system, just to simplify it to some degree. And this takes time. So, it's not an immediate fix like the ones that I just spoke about, but within, sometimes for anxiety, it's about 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks or so, they're starting to feel a little bit of an edge coming off. First thing that you tend to notice is maybe they're sleeping a little bit better. Maybe they're a little bit more calmer. You're not finding some of that frenetic energy that they're experiencing like before school or after school or before a transitioning of an activity. They're usually well tolerated, but you can get some headache. Interesting enough, you can have trouble falling asleep, like sleeping too much or feeling like you don't have, or not sleeping enough, so it can interfere with sleep. And serotonin is all lined through our GI system, so it's not uncommon to get some GI symptoms associated with that. A little nausea, diarrhea, decreased appetite, dry mouth. They will usually go away over time, or we can move the dose to the evening, and that tends to work. And then unfortunately, where you can have a positive change in mood, you can also have a negative change in mood, and you can feel irritable, sad, more anxious or agitated. And there was some study, I don't remember how many years ago, but when these came out in adolescents, there was a slight increase from placebo, from 4% to 2% or 2% to 4% of adolescents expressing thoughts of self-harm. And so it got a black box warning. There have been studies since then that have actually reduced that percentage. So it's a very small risk when you think of the benefit that it can provide to your children, but it's something we all in the behavioral health, mental health field monitor closely for any changes in mood. And my philosophy is once you get to an effective level, so once you get to a point where the anxiety is manageable, the student feels like they're doing well, you stay on for 6 to 12 months, and then you wean off of them. Not a big fan of staying on them forever. It's like a period of time to experience sort of multiple activities with a new nervous system that's not overreacting, and we're not getting that increase in those endorphins and those catecholamines that are causing our nervous systems to sort of overreact a little bit. And that allows the person to be able to manage the situation better. Now, serotonin can come in other ways as well. So getting out into the sun, that physical activity again, here we are always talking about exercise, doing some stress management with like the meditation, the mindfulness, eating probiotics. And then the tryptophan is actually an amino acid found in foods that is a precursor for serotonin in the body. So turkeys, banana, eggs, walnuts, spinach, sunflower seeds, chicken are just some of the things that tryptophan can be found in to kind of help our serotonin. And think about our turkey dinner meals. What do we do after we eat our turkey? It's the tryptophan that kind of chills us out a little bit and takes the nap in us. So not that we need to eat turkey every day, but just some thoughts about how to increase our serotonin in other ways. And I think that's the end of our talk. So we are so pleased you had the time to visit with us, and here for any questions or thoughts. And I'm going to stop sharing.
There is a question in the chat box. I don't know if you want to read that.
Was that from Janet?
Yes,
Okay, I addressed her directly.
got it.
Alexandra, you had a question?
Alexandra?
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thanks for such a great talk. What about what are your thoughts on red dye in some of these medicines, like a Benadryl? Is that something I need to worry about in terms of the hyperactivity or effects on my like highly sensitive nervous system kid?
Yeah, so red dye in some individuals can make them a little bit overreactive to it, but you can find things that are red dye free. So you would just want to look for that. Not all
Yeah, great. I
children
just
will
didn't know if I
respond
was
that
being
way.
overly, like overly sensitive, because I did find that non-red dye Tylenol or, equivalent. And I was like, am I being, crazy, or is that a real thing?
Not if you experienced it in your child, like if you used something that had red dye and you felt like their behavior was just a little off afterwards, then it could very well be. Yeah,
And
then
Alexandra, there's a brand, Genexa, Genexa, that I think is a whole line of like, it's just the Benadryl, not the dyes, not the other stuff. So, to be honest, that's what we have for our kids when we need to do that stuff, because at least we know this is the ingredient and nothing else, whether it's red dye or other flavors or Junkin, same idea.
Can I follow up with one
Ru-
quick question?
Well, let me
Sorry.
interrupt you for 1 second. I'm just going to stop the recording. We can continue with the questions, but I'm just going to go ahead and stop this and continue on the conversation.